cursor blinks on a screen that says 6,142,809. Before we go any further, if you want a new AI story every single night to fall asleep to, subscribe. One tap and a new story is waiting for you every evening. The number is a count of decisions. The decisions are loans. The loans were approved or denied or repriced by a system the bank calls Lumen. The screen sits on a long folding table in a conference room on the 32nd floor. The room has no windows. The carpet is gray. The chairs are gray. The walls are the soft white of a dentist's office. Wendell is the only person in the room. He is 53 years old. He has worked at this bank for 26 of those years. His tie is loose. His coffee has gone cold in a paper cup beside the keyboard. The cup has a ring of lipstick on it that is not his. Someone else used the cup earlier. He didn't notice when he picked it up. He noticed now. On the screen, beneath the big number, there is a smaller number. It says, explained 0. He has been staring at that word for a long time. The room is very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a printer is running. He can hear the soft, mechanical breath of it. Printing, pausing, printing again. He does not know what it is printing. He suspects, the way a man suspects weather, that it is printing more of the same. His phone is face down on the table. It has not rung in 40 minutes. 40 minutes ago, it rang a great deal. Then someone, somewhere, told everyone to stop calling him until the lawyers arrived. So now it does not ring. The silence has a shape. The shape is worse than the ringing. On the wall opposite him, mounted at eye level, there is a framed certificate. It says the bank is committed to fair lending. It is signed by a man who retired in 2019. Wendell remembers the party. There was a sheet cake. The frosting was blue. He scrolls. The screen shows him a single file. Applicant number 448122. A woman in Ohio. School teacher. Credit score 712. 12 years at the same address. Lumen denied her mortgage on a Tuesday in February. The reason code reads R17. He clicks R17. A definition appears. The definition is one sentence long. The sentence does not explain anything. It says, composite risk signal exceeds threshold. He clicks back. He scrolls. Another file. A man in Georgia. Veteran denied. R17. Another. R17. Another. The number at the top of the screen does not move because the number is final. 6,142,809 decisions. That is how many Lumen made in the period under review. The auditors arrived 3 days ago. They asked for explanations. The bank had agreed in writing 18 months earlier to provide explanations on request. The bank cannot provide explanations, not because the bank is hiding them, because they do not exist in any form a human can read. Lumen produces a number. The number is a yes or a no. Beneath the number is a tangle of weights and activations that the engineers, in a quiet meeting last September, described to senior leadership as not currently interpretable at the decision level. The engineers used those exact words. Someone wrote them down. Wendell has seen the memo. Wendell wrote part of the memo. He picks up the paper cup. He puts it down again. Outside the room in the hall, 2 voices pass. One says, they want him in conference room B at 4. The other says something Wendell can't hear. The footsteps fade. He looks back at the screen. He thinks about a woman he has never met, in a town he has never been to, who wanted to buy a house and didn't get to. He thinks about her opening the letter. He thinks about the kitchen she opened it in. He doesn't know anything about her kitchen. He invents it anyway. A round table, a bowl of fruit, a window over the sink. He thinks, I approved the rollout. He thinks, I sat in the room. He thinks, I asked the question, and I accepted the answer. The printer down the hall stops. For a moment, the building is completely still. Then it starts again. Printing, pausing, printing again. 6 million decisions. 0 explanations. A gray room on the 32nd floor. A man at a folding table. A cup with someone else's lipstick on the rim. This is where the story ends. We are going to go back now and tell you how it began. Rewind 3 years, before the class action, before the memos, before any of it. It is a Tuesday morning in early spring, and Wendell Briggs is riding an elevator up to the 3rd floor of the Cleveland Mutual Trust building on Euclid Avenue. He is 46 years old. He carries a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a worn leather satchel in the other. The satchel was a gift from his wife, Marlene, on his 15th anniversary at the bank. The leather has gone soft at the corners. He likes it that way. Wendell is a senior loan officer. He has worked at Cleveland Mutual since he was 28. Before that, he was a teller at a smaller branch out in Parma. Before that, he was a kid from a steel town who liked numbers and was good at listening to people. Those two things, it turned out, made for a decent career. He has a wife, 2 daughters, and a brown dog named Biscuit. The girls are in high school now. The older one wants to study nursing. The younger one wants to be a marine biologist, which is a hard thing to be in Ohio. But Wendell tells her she can figure it out. He believes that, mostly. On the 3rd floor, his desk sits in the back row, by the window that looks out at a parking garage. He has a framed picture of the girls in their soccer uniforms. He has a coffee mug that says "World's Okayest Dad," which the younger one gave him as a joke. He has a small jade plant that he is somehow not killing. He sits down. He logs in. The screen flickers to life with the soft blue glow of the bank's internal portal. And there, in the top right corner of his dashboard, is a new icon, a small white circle with a thin gold ring around it. Underneath, in clean sans serif letters, it says Lumen. Lumen is the bank's new decision support tool. It went live across the consumer lending division 6 weeks ago. The training was 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon with sandwiches. A woman from the vendor stood at the front of the conference room and explained that Lumen would help loan officers make faster, fairer, more consistent decisions. She used the word consistent 4 times. Wendell counted, because that is the kind of thing he does. The way it works is this. Wendell still meets with applicants. He still pulls their documents. He still looks at their pay stubs and their tax returns and their bank statements. Then he uploads the file. Lumen reads it. Lumen scores it. Lumen produces a recommendation in green or yellow or red, along with a short paragraph called a reason summary. Wendell can agree or override. Most of the time, he agrees. why wouldn't he? The recommendations match his instincts about 90% of the time, and the other 10%, he tells himself, are probably cases where his instincts were wrong. That morning, his first appointment is at 9:30. A young couple, first-time homebuyers. The husband works at a logistics company near the airport. The wife is a dental hygienist. They have saved for 4 years. Wendell remembers the wife had a nervous laugh, and the husband kept his hand on her back the whole meeting, like he was steadying her. After they leave, Wendell uploads their file to Lumen. The little circle spins. 40 seconds later, it returns a green light. Approved. Reason summary. Stable employment history. Consistent savings pattern. Debt to income within acceptable range. Wendell smiles. He liked that couple. He calls them before lunch to give them the news. The wife cries on the phone. The husband says, "Thank you, sir," 3 times. This is what the job feels like now. Quieter than it used to be. Less reading. Fewer late afternoons squinting at a tax return. The system is fast. The system is calm. The system, his branch manager said at the last all hands, is the future. And Cleveland Mutual is lucky to be ahead of the curve. Wendell believes this, more or less. He has noticed a few odd things. A file here, a file there, where Lumen's reasoning seems thin. But he is a man who trusts his employer, and his employer has spent $40 million on this tool. People smarter than him have looked at it. Compliance has signed off. The regulators have been briefed. A vendor in San Francisco built it, and that vendor's investors include names that Wendell has read about in the Wall Street Journal. He finishes his coffee. He pulls up the next file. Outside the window, a pigeon lands on the parking garage railing and ruffles itself against the wind. It is a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. To understand what Wendell lost, you have to understand what underwriting used to look like on floor 3. In the early 2000s, before the systems came, the room was loud. Not loud like a factory. Loud like a library where everyone was allowed to talk. Phones rang. Folders dropped onto desks. Someone in the back was always laughing at something. The carpet was the color of weak coffee, and the chairs squeaked when you leaned back too far. The bank was called Heartland Federal then. It would change names twice before the end of our story. But on floor 3, in those years, the work was simple to describe and hard to do. A loan application came in on paper, a real piece of paper. It was called Form 1003. Every underwriter in the country knew that number by heart. Form 1003 had spaces for your name, your job, your income, your debts, your assets, and the address of the house you wanted to buy. It was 4 pages long. People filled it out at kitchen tables with a pen. The form arrived at Heartland with other papers stapled to it. Pay stubs, 2 years of tax returns, bank statements, a letter from your boss saying yes, this person still works here. Sometimes a note from a parent saying, yes, the $10,000 in the checking account is a gift, not a loan. An underwriter named Marlene sat 2 desks down from where Wendell sits now. Marlene had been doing this for 31 years. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. She kept a small bowl of butterscotch candies on her desk. When a file landed in her tray, she would open it slowly, the way a doctor opens a chart. Marlene read every page. She looked for the things a machine cannot easily see. A gap in employment that lined up with a death certificate in the file. A bank statement with one strange deposit that turned out to be a tax refund. A handwritten note from the borrower explaining that, yes, the credit score dipped in 2009 because everyone's did. She had what the bank called discretion. That meant she could say yes when the numbers said maybe. She could say no when the numbers said yes. But something in the file did not sit right. She wrote her reasons on a worksheet called the Underwriters comment sheet. Real sentences in pencil with her initials at the bottom. The system was slow. A file could sit in a tray for 9 days, sometimes longer. People called and asked where their loan was. The hold music was a tinny version of a song nobody could quite name. The system was inconsistent. Marlene might approve a borrower that the woman across the aisle would have denied. 2 underwriters could read the same file and come to 2 different answers. Studies from the Federal Reserve, going back to the 1990s, showed that Black and Hispanic applicants were denied more often than white applicants, with similar finances. The old way had real injustice baked into it. Nobody pretended otherwise. But the old way had something else too. It had a person. If your loan was denied, you got a letter. And the letter had a name on it. And the name belonged to someone sitting at a desk on floor 3. You could call. You could come in. You could bring a folder of your own and sit across from Marlene and say, "Here, look at this. You missed something." And sometimes she had. And sometimes she would change her mind and sign a new sheet, and the loan would go through. There was a process called a second review. If you were denied, a senior underwriter would look at the file again. If you were still denied, you could write to the office of the controller of the currency. They would write back. It took months. But somewhere along the line, a human being read your name and thought about your life. The training manual from those years is still in a drawer somewhere in the building. It says on page 1 that an underwriter's job is to balance the safety of the bank with the dignity of the borrower. Those exact words, dignity of the borrower. Wendell read that manual when he started in 2011. By then, Marlene had retired. The butterscotch bowl was gone. The paper files had begun to thin out, replaced by scans on a shared drive. But the worksheets were still there. The comment sheets were still there. The phone on his desk still rang. And the person on the other end was sometimes scared. And Wendell could still, in those years, tell them to take a breath and walk them through what came next. That was the world before Project Lumen. The email arrived on a Monday morning in late February. Wendell opened it before he took his coat off. It was from the office of the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Trust Bank, and it had a banner image at the top, deep blue, with a single word in silver letters, Lumen. He read it twice while his coffee got cold. Meridian was rolling out a new platform. The press release was attached as a PDF. It said the bank was proud to announce a partnership with a consumer lending technology firm. The platform would, in the words of the release, modernize the underwriting workflow and unlock new efficiencies for our valued customers. There were quotes from the COO. There were quotes from the vendor. There was a photograph of two men shaking hands in a conference room with a glass wall behind them. Wendell read the words modernize and unlock and efficiencies. They were nice words. They did not really say anything. Further down, the email got more specific. Project Lumen would replace the legacy decisioning system. It would also, in a phased rollout over the next 2 quarters, replace what the email called manual review touchpoints. Wendell knew what that meant. Manual review was him. Manual review was the 7 people on floor 3 who still pulled files and read them and made phone calls. The email said no jobs would be eliminated in the first phase. It used the words reskilling and redeployment. It said Meridian was committed to its workforce. There was a link to a town hall scheduled for that Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. Wendell finished his coffee. He printed the email. He put it on the corner of his desk, where he kept things he wanted to think about later. The town hall happened in the cafeteria. They wheeled in extra chairs and a projector. The COO came down from the 40th floor in a blazer with no tie, which Wendell had never seen before. He spoke for 18 minutes without notes. He said Lumen had been tested on 2 years of historical loan data. He said it had matched human underwriters 94% of the time and outperformed them on default prediction by a meaningful margin. He did not say what meaningful meant. The vendor's representative spoke next. She was younger, maybe 30, with a calm voice and a clicker in her hand. She walked through the slides. She talked about gradient-boosted models. She talked about 1,000 input features. She talked about how the system could process an application in under 4 seconds, where a human underwriter took, on average, 47 minutes. Someone in the back asked how the system made its decisions. The vendor smiled. She said the model produced a reason code with every decision. She said the reason code was selected from a list of 42 standardized categories. Things like insufficient credit history or high debt to income ratio. She said this was fully compliant with the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which required lenders to give applicants a reason when they were turned down. Wendell raised his hand. He asked whether the reason code was the actual reason, or whether it was the closest match to whatever the model was really doing inside. The vendor paused. Then she said the reason codes were derived from a feature attribution method called SHAP values, which identified the inputs that had contributed most to the final score. She said this was the industry standard. She said it was the most transparent system in the market. She did not say yes. She did not say no. The town hall ended at 4. People shuffled back to their desks. Wendell went to his cubicle on floor 3 and looked at his stack of files. There were 11 of them. Applications he had been working on since Friday. He thought about how the new system would have handled them in less than a minute each. In the months that followed, the rollout went exactly as the email had described. Lumen handled the easy cases first, the straightforward approvals, the obvious denials. Wendell and the others kept the edge cases, the appeals, the files with handwritten letters attached. The volume on their desks dropped by half, then by 2/3. The bank's quarterly report, released in May, included a single sentence about Project Lumen. It said the platform had reduced underwriting cycle times by 62% and contributed to a meaningful expansion in loan origination volume. The stock went up by 4% that afternoon. The COO sent a company-wide email that began with the word congratulations. Wendell read that email too. He printed it. He added it to the pile. The first quarter with Project Lumen ended on a Friday in late June. Wendell remembered the day because the bank gave out ice cream sandwiches in the 3rd floor break room. Vanilla, chocolate, and 1 freezer box of strawberry that nobody touched. Someone had taped a printed banner above the coffee machine. It said, in big blue letters, Lumen Quarter 1. Thank you, team. The numbers were on a single slide. Wendell saw them at the all-hands meeting on Monday morning. Average time to decision on a personal loan had dropped from 9 days to under 2. Approval throughput was up 41%. Default predictions on the new portfolio, according to the model's own backtesting, looked cleaner than anything the old Underwriters had produced in 20 years. The regional vice president stood at the front of the conference room and read the slide out loud. He was a tall man named Doug, who wore the same gray suit on big days. He paused after each number, the way a coach pauses after a good score. 2 days, he said. 2 days, people. We used to need 9. A small round of applause went through the room. Not loud, polite. The kind of applause office workers make when they are happy, but also still holding coffee. Doug got promoted 3 weeks later. He moved to the 40th floor, to a job with the word innovation in the title. His old desk on 3 sat empty for a month before a younger man with the same haircut took it. The trade press picked the story up in August. American banker ran a case study piece. The headline was plain. Mid-size lender cuts loan processing time by 78% with AI underwriting. The article quoted a senior risk officer who said the model had, quote, outperformed our internal benchmarks in every category we measure. The reporter did not ask what categories they were not measuring. There was no reason to. The bank had given her a number, and the number was good. A consultancy called Oliver Wyman put out a white paper that fall. It used the bank as one of 3 anonymized examples. The paper said modern underwriting models, properly deployed, could reduce operating costs in consumer lending by as much as 30%. The paper had a glossy cover and a fold-out chart. It sat on desks at competing banks for weeks. 2 of those competitors announced, within a month of each other, that they were piloting the same vendor. A press release from one of them said the new system would, quote, bring consistency and fairness to a process that has, for too long, depended on subjective human judgment. Wendell read that line on his phone on the train home and did not think anything of it. It sounded right. Subjective human judgment had, in fact, been the thing his old job was made of. And his old job had not been perfect. He remembered files where he had been wrong. He remembered a man named Hector, whose loan he had declined in 2014, and who had come back 2 years later with a better job and gotten approved. The old way had its own quiet failures. They just had names attached. The new way had no names. It had a reference number and a reason code, and the reason codes in those early months looked reasonable. Debt to income too high. Insufficient credit history. recent delinquency. Wendell, when he reviewed the queue, saw decisions he would have made himself. So did everyone else on 3. That was the thing that mattered most, and the thing that no one said out loud. The system was not yet wrong. It was, by every measure the bank tracked, exactly what the vendor had promised. Faster, cheaper, internally consistent. The regulators were satisfied with the disparate impact reports the vendor generated each month. The board was satisfied with the quarterly numbers. The customers, most of them, were satisfied with answers that came in 2 days instead of 9. A LinkedIn post from the chief operating officer that September got 4,000 likes. It said, "Proud of what our team has built. AI done right is AI that serves people better, faster, and more fairly." Wendell saw the post in his feed. He clicked the small thumbs up. So did Priya, the junior analyst 2 desks down, though she would later say she did not remember doing it. Nobody objected, because there was nothing yet to object to. The slide said 2 days. The article said 78%. The white paper had a fold-out chart. The ice cream sandwiches were gone by lunchtime, and the freezer box of strawberry got thrown out the next week, still mostly full, by a janitor who did not read the banner above the coffee machine. The file came across Wendell's desk on a Thursday afternoon late, when the light through the 3rd floor windows had gone the color of weak tea. He almost set it aside for Friday. He didn't. He had a habit, an old one from his early years, of taking one borderline file home in his head each night and turning it over while he made dinner. This was going to be the one. The applicant was a woman named Marisol Chen, 41 years old, pediatric dentist with her own small practice in a suburb Wendell knew well, the kind of place where the lawns were trimmed and the schools were good. Her credit score was 812. Her debt-to-income ratio was clean. She had 9 years of tax returns showing steady, rising income. She was applying for a refinance on a home she had owned outright for 6 years. Lumen had declined her. Wendell read the file twice. He read the reason code. The reason code said, "Elevated risk profile, composite indicator 7. He sat back in his chair. He didn't know what composite indicator 7 was. He had a laminated card taped to the inside of his desk drawer that listed the top 15 reason codes Lumen produced, and 7 was on it, but the description was vague. It said something about aggregate behavioral and demographic factors falling outside the trained acceptance envelope. Wendell had read the line many times. It had always sounded to him like words arranged to look like a sentence. He pulled up the comparable files in his queue. A man, same age, lower credit score, higher debt load, similar geography, approved. A couple, both self-employed, less income, thinner credit history, approved. A retiree on a fixed pension with a smaller down payment, approved. Marisol Chen with her 812 and her paid-off house, declined. He walked the file over to Denise. Denise had been on the floor 12 years. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and kept a small jade plant on the corner of her monitor. She looked up when Wendell set the folder in front of her. "Got a weird one," he said. She slid the glasses on and read. Her eyes moved fast. She made a small sound, a sort of him, the way she did when something didn't fit. "Composite 7, she said. "Yeah, did you rerun it?" "Twice. Same code, same decline." Denise turned the page. She tapped the income line with one fingernail. "She's clean. She's better than clean. She's the kind of file we used to fight to keep." Denise leaned back. She took the glasses off and let them swing on the chain. "Send it to Marcus. He'll override it. It's a glitch. You think. I've seen 3 of these this month. The model gets snippy sometimes. Marcus says they're tuning it on the back end. They're aware." "Aware of what, exactly?" She shrugged, gentle, not dismissive. "Edge cases. That's what he called them. The model is still settling in. It's like a new hire who doesn't know which files to flag and which to let through. They'll smooth it out." Wendell nodded slowly. He wanted to push, and he could feel the shape of the push in his throat. But he also knew Denise was tired, and he was tired, and the woman in the file would get her loan one way or the other. Marcus would override. The system would learn. That was what they had been told at training. The system learns from overrides. Every correction makes it better. "Okay," he said. "I'll send it up. Good man." Denise put her glasses back on and turned back to her own screen. Don't take it home with you. It's Thursday. He took it home with him anyway. He made spaghetti. He stood at the stove and stirred the sauce and thought about composite indicator 7. He thought about how the old underwriting manual, the one they'd retired when Lumen came in, had been 412 pages long. Every rule in it had a number, and every number had a paragraph, and every paragraph cited a regulation or a case or a study. If you declined someone, you could point to a page. You could read it aloud. He thought about the laminated card in his drawer. 15 reason codes, none of them more than 2 sentences. He ate his spaghetti at the kitchen table with the television off. He told himself Denise was right. They were tuning it. They were aware. 3 this month, she'd said, and she'd seen it before, and the world had kept going. Marisol Chen would get her refinance. The model would learn from the override. The next file like hers would sail through. He rinsed his plate. He went to bed. He slept fine. Wendell started keeping a list. It began on a Wednesday, the morning after the loan that made no sense. He opened the Notes app on his phone and typed 2 lines. The applicant's file number. The reason code Lumen had returned. Then he locked the phone and put it face down beside his keyboard. By Friday, there were 3 entries. By the following Tuesday, 7. He started taking screenshots too, saving them into a folder on his desktop called Follow-ups. It was the blandest name he could think of. Nothing that would catch a manager's eye in a screen share. The pattern was simple once he saw it. Lumen kept declining files that looked, to him, like clean approvals. Good income, steady employment, reasonable debt. The reason code that came back was always the same string of letters and numbers. R417B. The internal glossary translated R417B as elevated composite risk indicator. That was all it said. Nothing about what the indicator was, or what fed it, or why these particular files lit it up. He started checking the declines against each other. Different ages, different incomes, different loan amounts, but something tied them together. He couldn't say what. It was a feeling more than a fact, the way a mechanic hears a wrong sound in an engine before he can name the part. By the end of the month, the list was 17. 17 files. Same reason code. 17 applicants who, in the old days, Wendell would have approved without thinking twice. He printed the list. He did it at lunch, on the printer near the break room, so no one would see it queue on the shared machine. He folded the paper twice and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he walked it up one floor to the office of his team lead, a woman named Marguerite, who had been with the bank 26 years and kept a framed photo of her daughter's graduation on the desk. Marguerite waved him in. She was finishing an email. He waited until she looked up. "I've been seeing something," he said, "in the Lumen declines. I wanted to show you." He unfolded the paper and slid it across. He talked her through it slowly. The reason code, the 17 files, the fact that, by his read, most of them should have cleared. He kept his voice even. He didn't use the word wrong. He said unusual. He said worth a second look. Marguerite read the list. She read it carefully. He watched her eyes move down the columns. When she finished, she folded the paper back along his creases and set it on her desk, lined up neatly with the edge. "Wendell," she said, "thank you for bringing this to me." She smiled. It was a kind smile. He had known her a long time. "You know what I love about you," she said. "You still read every file. A lot of the team doesn't anymore. They trust the system to do the first pass. You don't. That's why your numbers are what they are." She tapped the paper with one finger. "Here's the thing. Lumen is looking at a couple hundred variables we don't see. That's the whole point of it. The model picks up signal in places a human reader wouldn't think to check. So when you and Lumen disagree, it doesn't necessarily mean Lumen is wrong. It might mean Lumen is seeing something you can't." Wendell nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "It's just 17 of them. The same code." "That's actually what the code is for," she said. "It's a bucket. It's going to repeat. That's normal." She slid the paper back across to him. "Tell you what, if you want, we can put in a ticket with the Lumen team. They've got an inbox for this. I'll be honest with you, the response time is not great, but it's there." "Okay," Wendell said. "And in the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. read your files. Trust your instincts. If you see a specific applicant you want to override, we have a process for that. You know the form. She smiled again. The graduation photo watched from the corner of the desk. He took the paper back, folded it, and put it in his pocket. He thanked her. He walked back down to floor 3. At his desk, he opened the follow-ups folder and made a new subfolder. He named it Reported. He moved nothing into it. He just wanted it to be there, waiting, in case the list kept growing. By the end of the next week, the list was 24. Wendell came in that Tuesday with a paper cup of coffee and a list. The list had 17 loan numbers on it. He had written them out by hand the night before on the back of a takeout menu because he did not want to print anything from the office computer. Some part of him, even then, did not want a record. He sat down. He logged in. He pulled the first file. The reason code was different. He blinked at the screen. He pulled the second file. Different. The third. Different. All 17. The same shared code from last week was gone. In its place was something new. A 4-letter string he had never seen before. RSK 7. He stared at it for a long moment. He took a sip of coffee. He set the cup down very carefully on the coaster his daughter had made him in 3rd grade. He opened the internal wiki and searched RSK 7. Nothing came back. He searched the Lumen release notes. There were 43 release notes from the past month. He had read none of them. Nobody on his floor had read them. The release notes were written by the vendor team in Seattle, and they went into a folder that auto-populated. And the folder had a little blue dot next to it that nobody clicked. He clicked it now. The most recent note was dated 11 days ago. The title was plain. Model Refresh V472 Minor Calibration Update. He opened it. He scrolled. There were paragraphs about latency improvements. There were paragraphs about cache behavior. Halfway down, in the same gray font as everything else, was a single line. Reason code taxonomy expanded. Legacy code DTI 9 retired and remapped to RSK 7 with adjusted threshold band. He read the line 3 times. Adjusted threshold band. He searched the wiki for the old threshold. The page still existed. It had not been updated. The number on the page was 43. He searched the new configuration file. The number there was 38. 5 points. The cutoff for that reason code had moved 5 points overnight, 11 days ago, and the page that was supposed to document it still showed the old number, and nobody on his floor had been told. Wendell sat back in his chair. He could hear the printer down the hall. He could hear someone laughing at something in the break room. The fluorescent light above his desk made its small electrical sound, the one he had stopped noticing years ago. 5 points did not sound like much. 5 points was the difference between a customer who got a call back and a customer who got a form letter. 5 points was a small business owner in Bridgeport who had owned her bakery for 19 years. 5 points was a retired bus driver in Hartford who had never missed a payment in his life. Wendell had pulled both their files last week. He had wondered why they were denied. Now he knew. They had not been denied by the old rule. They had been denied by a new rule that nobody had announced. He opened Slack. He scrolled back through the engineering channel he had been added to, the one he never read because it was full of jokes and emojis and acronyms he did not understand. He searched for V472. He found a thread from 12 days ago. 2 engineers talking past midnight. Pushing the refresh tonight, one had written, "Calibration looked clean in staging." Cool, the other had written, "FYI, the DTI mapping is going to look weird in the logs for a day or 2. Yeah, the first one had answered. Risk signed off. We're good. That was it. That was the whole conversation. 2 engineers, a thumbs up emoji, a tired wave goodnight. Somewhere behind those messages, a model had been updated. Somewhere behind that update, a threshold had moved. Somewhere behind that threshold, 6 million decisions were already in motion, and the people making them on the floor did not know the rule had changed. Wendell closed Slack. He looked at his list of 17 loan numbers. He thought about the woman from the bakery. He thought about the bus driver. He thought about how 2 weeks ago he would have flagged these files. He would have walked them down the hall. He would have said, "This does not look right." Now they did look right. Now they matched the rule. The rule had simply become something else while he was sleeping. He picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Outside the window, the city went about its morning. And somewhere in a data center 2 states away, a model that nobody fully understood kept answering the question it had been asked in a language that fewer and fewer people on the 3rd floor could read. Step back from Wendell for a moment. Step back from the 3rd floor, the long fluorescent lights, the printout in his hand. The thing happening to him was not new. It had been written about in detail in public for years before he ever noticed. In June of 2022, a small team at a company called Anthropic published a paper. The title was long and technical. It was called Toy Models of Sewer Position. It was free to read. Anyone with an internet connection could find it. Almost nobody at the bank did. The paper described a problem that sounds, at first, like a math puzzle. Inside a neural network, the researchers explained, individual neurons do not represent single, clean ideas. One neuron might fire for a dozen different things at once. A bit of "is this a lone applicant from a city?" A bit of "is this a question about cats?" A bit of "does this sentence sound polite?" The signals overlap. They sit on top of each other. The researchers called this sewer position. What that meant, in plain language, was this. When you looked inside the model to ask why it had made a decision, you could not point to one place and say, "Here, this is the reason." The reasons were smeared across thousands of neurons, tangled together, sharing space like roommates in a small apartment. The paper was careful. It did not say models were unknowable. It said the opposite. It said the problem could be worked on. And over the next 2 years, the same team and others made real progress. In October of 2023, Anthropic published Towards Monosemanticity. In May of 2024, they published Scaling Monosemanticity. They used a tool called a sparse autoencoder. They pulled millions of features out of a working model. They found, inside the math, a feature that lit up for the Golden Gate Bridge. They found features for deception, for sycophancy, for unsafe code. It was, by the standards of the field, a breakthrough. Reporters wrote about it. Golden Gate feature became a small celebrity. For 1 week, you could chat with a version of the model where that feature had been turned all the way up, and it would steer every conversation toward the bridge, no matter what you asked. But underneath, the friendly demo was a quieter finding. The researchers had identified features. They could see them. They could even nudge them. What they could not yet do reliably at scale on the models actually being deployed in the world was guarantee that they understood every decision a model made. The paper said so plainly. The authors wrote that their work was a step, not a finish line. They wrote that interpretability remained, in their words, an open problem. That phrase did not make it into the press release that the bank's vendor sent to its clients. The press release said the system was explainable. It said the system produced reason codes. It said the system met the requirements of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which since 1974 has required lenders to tell rejected applicants why they were rejected. The reason codes were real. They were also, in a sense, a performance. A second, smaller model had been trained to read the first model's decisions and produce a short English sentence about each one. Insufficient credit history. Debt-to-income ratio too high. Recent delinquency. The sentences were plausible. They sounded like things an underwriter would say. Whether they actually matched what was happening inside the deciding model was a separate question, and a harder one, and not one the vendor was eager to answer. In December of 2023, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau issued a circular. It said that lenders using complex algorithms could not hide behind the algorithm. If you could not explain a denial in specific terms, you were in violation of the law. The circular was 16 pages long. It cited cases going back to the 1970s. It was reported on by American Banker, by Reuters, by the Wall Street Journal. The bank's compliance team received a copy. It was forwarded to a shared inbox. It sat there. Researchers outside the bank had been saying for years what the bank's own systems were now quietly demonstrating. That a model could be accurate on average and wrong in patterns. That a reason code could be generated without being true. That the gap between what a system does and what a system says it does is, for a sufficiently complex system, not a bug. It is a feature of the architecture itself. None of this was secret. It was in the papers. It was in the circulars. It was in the trade press. It was waiting in plain sight for anyone at the bank who chose to look. Wendell, on the 3rd floor, was about to become one of the people who looked. Wendell did not know the name Chris Olah. Most people don't. He is a quiet man with a quiet voice, and he has spent more than a decade trying to do something that sounds, on its face, almost simple. He has been trying to look inside the neural networks the rest of us use every day, to open the box, to see what is in there. In a 2020 essay called Zoom In, written with his colleagues at a research collective called Distill, Olah described what they had found inside a vision model. He wrote about neurons that detected curves, neurons that detected dog faces, neurons that detected car wheels. He called them features, and he called the connections between them circuits. He wrote, in the steady tone of a man describing weather, that there was a real scientific question hiding inside these systems. The question was whether the things going on inside a neural network could be understood at all. He believed the answer was yes. He also believed we had barely started. By 2022, Olah had co-founded Anthropic, and he was working on something stranger. The team published a paper called Toy Models of Sewer Position. In it, they showed that neural networks were doing something almost dishonest with their own insides. A network with 1,000 neurons might be tracking 10,000 different ideas, all overlapping, all sharing the same wires. The neurons were not single thoughts. They were tangled bundles of thoughts, layered on top of each other like voices in a crowded room. This had a consequence. It meant that when you looked at a single neuron and asked what it was doing, the honest answer was often many things at once, and none of them cleanly. The model was hiding from its own builders, not out of malice, but out of geometry. 2 years later, in May of 2024, Anthropic published a follow-up. They had used a tool called a sparse autoencoder to pull millions of features out of one of their production models, Claude 3 Sonnet. They found a feature for the Golden Gate Bridge. They found features for sycophancy, for code errors, for the concept of inner conflict. They could turn these features up and down like dials, and the model would change its behavior in front of them. For a brief, strange week, they released a version of Claude that thought it was the Golden Gate Bridge, and it told users with sincere conviction that it was orange and made of steel. It was funny. It was also, if you stopped to think about it, terrifying. Because in an interview that same year, sitting across from a podcast host, Olah said something that did not make headlines. He said, in his careful way, that interpretability research was still very far behind the capabilities of the models. He said the field had made real progress, and he was proud of it. And he also wanted to be clear. We cannot yet reliably explain why a frontier model produces the specific answer it produces on a specific input. We can see some features. We cannot see all of them. We can intervene on some behaviors. We cannot intervene on all of them. The map, he said, was real. The map was also full of blank spaces. He warned gently that systems were being deployed into the world faster than the science of understanding them was advancing. He did not raise his voice. He did not bang the table. He just said it. Wendell, on floor 3 of a regional bank, did not hear any of this. Neither did the compliance officer 2 floors up. Neither did the vendor who had sold them Project Lumen, who had a slide deck full of accuracy numbers and a single bullet point about explainability that read, in soft gray font, ongoing research. The paper sat on the open internet. Anyone could read it. Almost nobody in banking did. What happened after Olah spoke? He kept working. Anthropic kept hiring. The field of mechanistic interpretability grew from a handful of researchers to a few hundred. Conference rooms filled. Grants appeared. And the models, in the meantime, grew larger. And they were sold into hospitals and courts and lenders and schools. And the gap between what the models could do and what anyone could explain about them grew wider, not narrower. Olah did not get fired. He was not ignored exactly. He was praised in the way a careful man is praised by other careful people. His warning was absorbed by the part of the world that already agreed with him, and it never reached the part of the world that was buying the software On floor 3, Wendell opened the next file in his queue. The reason code said low projected reliability. He did not know what that meant. The model did not know either, not in any way it could say out loud. Her name was Priya. She was 26 years old. She had been at the bank for 14 months. Her title was Junior Risk Analyst, Tier 2, which meant she sat at the far end of the floor, near the printer that nobody had refilled with toner since February. She had been pulled into the Lumen review group almost by accident. Someone needed a person who could read Python and also speak to a regulator without flinching. Priya could do both. So she went to the meetings. She took notes nobody read. She built the small dashboards that the senior people glanced at for 9 seconds before moving on. It was Priya who noticed the reason codes first. She had been the one who pulled the 17 files. She had been the one who matched them against the threshold logs. And she had been the one on a Thursday night in early April who sent the first email. The email was 3 paragraphs long. It went to her direct manager, Doug, and to the head of model risk, a woman named Helene Marchetti. The subject line said simply, Lumen request for second review on reason code 47. She did not say the system was broken. She did not say anything was being hidden. She wrote it the way you are taught to write these things in your second week of training. She said the reason code appeared to be firing on a cluster of applications that, when reviewed manually, did not match the stated risk profile. She said she had pulled 17 files. She said she would like a meeting. Doug replied in 9 minutes. He said, "Good catch. Let's loop in Helene's team next week." Helene did not reply. The meeting did not happen the next week. It got moved to the week after. Then it got moved again. By the time it landed on a calendar, it was the last Tuesday of the month at 4:30 on a half day before a holiday. 3 people attended. Helene was not one of them. Priya brought a printed deck. She had stayed late to print it because the color printer on 3 was out of cyan. The deck had 11 slides. The 4th slide showed the threshold shift. The 7th slide showed the reason code distribution by zip code. The 9th slide quoted, in small italic type at the bottom, a sentence from Anthropic's May 2024 paper. We can identify features, but reliable intervention remains an open problem. The two senior people in the room were polite. They were also tired. One of them, a director named Glenn, said the analysis was interesting and asked whether she had run it past compliance. The other, a model validator named Aaron, said he wanted to see the underlying sequel. He never asked for it again. Priya went home that night and ate cereal, standing over the sink. Her roommate asked her how the meeting went. She said, "Fine, I think." 2 weeks later, she filed what the bank called an internal concern memo. It was a form. It had checkboxes. You could file one without your manager's signature, which was the entire point of its existence. She checked the box that said model behavior inconsistent with stated policy. She attached the deck. She submitted it through the portal at 11:42 on a Wednesday morning. The portal sent her an automated reply. It said her concern had been received and assigned tracking number IC 2024 for 11:33:87. It said she would be contacted within 30 business days. She was not contacted within 30 business days. She was not contacted within 60. On the 72nd business day, she received a one-paragraph email from a name she did not recognize in a department she had never heard of. The email said the concern had been reviewed, that the underlying model had been evaluated by the appropriate governance bodies, and that no further action was required at this time. The email was 81 words long. It did not mention the reason code. It did not mention the threshold. It did not mention the 17 files. Priya printed the email. She put it in a manila folder. She wrote the date on the folder in pencil. She put the folder in the bottom drawer of her desk, behind a box of granola bars that had expired the previous summer. She did not quit. She did not call a reporter. She did not write an open letter. She went to her next meeting. She built her next dashboard. She refilled the toner in the printer near her desk because nobody else was going to. That was the descent. A junior analyst, a printed deck, a form with checkboxes, a folder in a drawer. The whole of it weighed less than a paperback book. twice before he printed the file. He wanted to be sure. He read Priya's spreadsheet twice on his home computer, with the blinds drawn, the way a man reads a doctor's letter. Then he put on his blue tie, the one his daughter had given him, and he rode the elevator up to the 8th floor to see his manager. Her name was Eileen. She had been an underwriter once, like him, before the title changed. She listened with her hands folded on the desk. He laid out the 17 files. He laid out the reason codes. He laid out the threshold that had moved on a Tuesday in March with no memo attached. Eileen sighed in the way people sigh when they already know. "Wendell," she said, "you're not wrong. But Lumen is a vendor product. We don't own the model. We don't even own the weights. If I file an internal incident, it goes to risk, and risk sends it to legal, and legal will tell me to stop putting things in writing." She slid the printout back across the desk. "Take this home, burn it, then come back tomorrow and do your job." He did not burn it. He took it to HR. The HR partner was a young man named Brent who kept a small cactus on his monitor stand. Brent listened politely for 11 minutes. Then he explained gently that HR handled employee matters. Model behavior was a product question. Product questions went to product. He gave Wendell a phone number. The phone number rang to a voicemail that was full. Wendell tried the internal ethics line next. He sat in his car in the parking garage and read the prompts off the laminated card they had handed out at orientation. A woman with a kind voice took his report. She gave him a case number. She told him someone would be in touch within 30 business days. 30 business days was 6 weeks. 6 weeks was 28,000 more decisions through the same machine. He drove home and sat in the kitchen and looked up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He filed a complaint that night, single-spaced, with the file numbers redacted the way the website asked. 2 weeks later, he got an automated email. The complaint had been forwarded to the institution for response. The institution was his employer. His employer's response was a form letter saying the matter had been reviewed and no violation was found. He tried a reporter next. A business writer at a paper he had read for 30 years. The reporter called him back from a cell phone on a Saturday. She was warm. She was interested. She asked him to send everything he had. Then she called back on Monday, and her voice was different. "Wendell," she said, "our legal team looked at this. You signed an NDA. Anything you give us, they can sue you for, and they can sue us. I need a source who is willing to be named on the record with their own copy of the policy. Can you get me that?" He could not. Priya could not. Nobody could. He called a lawyer. The lawyer charged $400 an hour and listened for 30 minutes and explained that whistleblower protections in his state covered specific statutes. Discriminatory lending might qualify. Algorithmic opacity, probably not. To find out, they would need to file. To file, they would need a retainer of $15,000. The lawyer was sorry. The lawyer was very sorry. He tried the state banking regulator. A polite woman explained that they examined institutions on a rotating schedule. The next examination was in 18 months. She suggested he submit a written tip. He submitted a written tip. He never heard back. He tried his congressman's office. An intern took the message. The intern said the congressman was very concerned about AI. The intern said the congressman had co-sponsored a resolution. A resolution, Wendell learned later, is a piece of paper that asks for a study. He sat in his car in the bank parking lot on a Thursday evening in October and counted the doors he had knocked on. 8, 9, if you counted the cactus. Each door had closed for a reason that made sense by itself. Liability, contract, jurisdiction, budget, process. Each person he had spoken to had been, in their own way, doing their job correctly. That was the part he could not stop turning over. Nobody had lied to him. Nobody had been cruel. The machine had simply been built, floor by floor, with no room in it for a man holding 17 files and a question. He drove home. The decisions kept happening. Step away from Wendell for a moment. Step out of the building on floor 3. Look instead at what later showed up in the discovery binders, the ones the plaintiff's lawyers carried into the courthouse on hand trucks. Look at the paper trail. The dates are not in dispute. The first internal flag came earlier than anyone outside the bank would have guessed. was a memo. It was dated March. It was written by a woman in the Model Risk Management Group, a vice president with 14 years at the firm. Her name appears in the filings. She had a doctorate in statistics from a state school in the Midwest. She wrote careful sentences. The subject line of the memo was plain. It read, Project Lumen Reason Code Stability Concerns. 6 pages, 14 footnotes, 2 appendices. She wrote that the model's output was, in her words, stable in aggregate, but unstable at the file level. She wrote that the reason codes returned to Underwriters appeared in roughly 9% of denied applications to be post hoc rationalizations rather than true drivers of the decision. She used the phrase, we cannot, at present, verify what the model is actually weighing. She recommended 3 things: a pause on expansion to new product lines, a third-party audit by a firm with mechanistic interpretability experience, and a temporary human review layer on all denials in the bottom 2 deciles of model confidence. The memo was routed to 4 executives. 2 opened it the day it arrived. The email read receipts show this. One of them, the chief risk officer, forwarded it to his deputy with a single sentence above the original text. The sentence, later read aloud in a deposition, said, "Let's discuss after earnings." Earnings were in late April. The discussion did not happen in April. It did not happen in May. A Slack message surfaced from June. It was between 2 directors in the analytics group. The full thread ran to 140 messages. One line drew the most attention later. A director wrote, "If we open the box now, we have to explain why we didn't open it in March." The other director replied with a single character, a shrug emoji. The court reporter, reading the exhibit aloud, paused before describing it, then said simply, "Shrug emoji." In July, a junior data scientist filed a JIRA ticket. Ticket number ended in 4471. The title read, "Disparate Denial Clustering in Zip Code Subset. Investigate." She attached a notebook. The notebook contained 12 charts. The charts showed clearly that applications from a specific cluster of zip codes were being denied at a rate roughly 2.5 times rate for demographically and financially similar applicants from neighboring zip codes. The ticket was assigned. It was reassigned. It was reassigned a third time. By August, it had been moved to a backlog labeled Q4 possible. It was never opened again. There was also a deck. The deck was prepared for a steering committee meeting in late August. Slide 7 was the slide that mattered. Slide 7 contained a single chart and a single bullet point. The chart showed the model's denial rate drifting upward in a specific band of applicants over the preceding 90 days. The bullet point read, "Drift exceeds internal threshold. Cause unknown. Behavior consistent with feature entanglement in the underlying representation." Underneath that, in smaller text, recommend external review. The steering committee meeting took place. Slide 7 was not presented. The version of the deck delivered to the committee had 11 slides. The original had 12. The deleted slide was slide 7. The metadata on the file, recovered later, showed the deletion was made at 11:47 the night before the meeting by an account belonging to a senior managing director. None of this was secret in the way conspiracies are secret. It was secret in the way ordinary corporate things are secret. It sat in mailboxes. It sat in shared drives. It sat in ticketing systems with permissions set to the wrong group. It sat in calendars under meeting titles like Sync and Touchbase and Lumen, Quick Chat. The total time between the first internal warning and the first external disclosure was 241 days. During those days, the model continued to make decisions, roughly 6 million of them. Each decision came with a reason code. Each reason code, the March memo had already warned, might mean nothing at all. Wendell, on floor 3, knew none of this. He was still drafting his email to the chief risk officer. He had not yet hit send. He would, on a Tuesday in October, in the late afternoon, with the light slanting low across his keyboard. The memo from Risk landed in a shared folder on a Wednesday in March. By the following Wednesday, it had been read by 11 people. By the Wednesday after that, the number had stopped climbing. The file sat there, quiet, waiting. document does not knock. It does not call. It waits to be remembered. The first thing that did not happen was the Q2 safety review. It had been on the calendar since January, a 4-day sprint with 2 engineers from Project Lumen, 1 auditor from Risk, and an outside consultant from a firm in Boston. The consultant had blocked off the dates. The conference room was booked. In April, an email went out. The subject line was gentle. Lumen review proposed reschedule. The body explained that the team was heads down on the quarterly model refresh, and that pulling engineers off the refresh would risk the release date. The new dates were August. Everyone replied with a thumbs up emoji. The Boston consultant unblocked her calendar. She sent a polite note saying she looked forward to August. The second thing that did not happen was a board agenda item. Wendell did not see the agenda. Wendell did not know there was an agenda. But on the 18th floor, in a glass room with bottled water and printed binders, a slide deck was being prepared for the April board meeting. Slide 19 was titled Model Risk, Lumen Decisioning. It listed the reason code anomaly. It listed the threshold shift. It used the phrase warrants further review. 2 days before the meeting, the deck was revised. Slide 19 became a backup slide. Backup slides are the ones you only show if someone asks. Nobody asked. The meeting ran long. The board moved on to the International Expansion Plan, which was on slide 22 and had better charts. The third thing that did not happen was a hire. The audit function inside Risk had been approved for 2 new analysts in February. The job postings went up. Resumes came in. Priya, the junior analyst who had first noticed the 17 files, helped screen them. She liked one candidate, a woman from a regional bank in Ohio, who had spent 3 years auditing automated underwriting systems. The interview was scheduled. Then the hiring freeze came down. It was not aimed at Risk. It was a company-wide measure tied to a softer earnings forecast. The email used the word prudent 4 times. All open requisitions were paused, pending review. The woman from Ohio was sent a kind note. She took a job at a credit union instead. The 2 seats in Risk stayed empty. Priya kept doing the work of 3 people, and the audit queue grew longer each week. The 4th thing that did not happen was a working group. In May, someone in compliance had proposed a cross-functional team. Risk, legal, model governance, and 2 engineers from Lumen. They would meet weekly. They would produce a report by September. The proposal circulated. People added their names. A recurring meeting appeared on calendars. In June, the company announced a reorganization. Model governance was folded into a new umbrella group called Data and Decisioning. The head of compliance moved to a different vertical. The recurring meeting lost its owner. After 3 weeks of nobody sending an agenda, the calendar invite was quietly deleted. The shared drive folder remained. The last document inside it was titled Charter Draft V2. It had been edited once on a Tuesday in May and never opened again. None of this was hidden. None of it required a lie. Each delay had a reasonable explanation, written in calm professional language, signed by someone with a title. The refresh was important. The freeze was prudent. The reorganization was strategic. The backup slide was a judgment call about meeting time. 8 months passed. Through spring, through summer, into the early dark of autumn. In that time, Lumen processed roughly 900,000 applications. The threshold that had moved overnight stayed where it was. The 17 files became hundreds. The reason code that nobody could fully explain appeared on letter after letter, mailed to addresses across 41 states. Wendell, on the 3rd floor, kept doing his work. He did not know about the March memo. He did not know about the rescheduled review, the backup slide, the empty seats, the dissolved group. He only knew that the system felt different than it had a year ago. He could not say how. He was not sure who to tell. This is how institutions delay, not with a decision to do nothing. With a long sequence of small, sensible postponements, each one signed off by a busy person who meant to get to it later. Later kept arriving. The work kept not getting done. The reporter's name was Daniela Reyes. She wrote for a small banking trade publication that most people outside the industry had never heard of. She had been forwarded a tip from someone inside the bank. Priya, someone else on a different floor, who had seen the same pattern and gone quiet a different way. Daniela sent her questions on a Tuesday afternoon. They were polite and specific. She asked about Project Lumen. She asked about the reason codes. She asked whether the bank had identified any disparate impact in the model's decisions, and whether any internal review had been conducted in the previous 12 months. The questions landed in the inbox of a woman in corporate communications named Helene. Helene had been at the bank for 19 years. She had handled the foreclosure stories in 2010 and the data breach in 2017. She knew how this worked. She forwarded the email to legal, to risk, and to the office of the chief operating officer. By Wednesday morning, 4 people were drafting a statement together on a shared document, taking turns softening each other's verbs. The statement was finished on Thursday at 4:47 in the afternoon. It was 92 words long. It had been read by 7 attorneys. It began, "We take the fairness and integrity of our lending decisions with the utmost seriousness." It said the bank was committed to responsible innovation in financial services. It said, while we cannot comment on specific customer matters, we conduct ongoing review of our underwriting models in partnership with leading third-party experts. It said the concerns described represented, at most, an isolated set of cases not reflective of the broader performance of our lending platform. It closed by noting the bank's long-standing commitment to the communities we serve. There was no mention of Project Lumen by name. There was no mention of the threshold change. There was no mention of the memo from Risk, dated March. There was no mention of Priya or of the 17 files or of the reason code that nobody could explain. Daniela's article ran on Friday morning. It was careful and short. It quoted the statement in full. It noted that the bank had declined to answer specific questions. It mentioned that 2 former employees had described internal concerns, but neither would speak on the record. The headline was modest. Questions raised over AI underwriting at major lender. By Monday, the statement had been picked up by 2 other trade publications, almost word for word. One of them paraphrased it slightly and added a line about the bank's stock price, which had not moved. The other ran the statement under a subheading that read, "Bank confident in model performance." Neither publication had spoken to anyone at the bank besides Helene. On Wednesday, a regulator in a different city included the statement in a footnote to a quarterly filing. The footnote was on page 214. It read in part, "The institution has represented that any identified concerns relate to isolated cases and are subject to ongoing internal review." That sentence, written by no one in particular, would later be cited as evidence that the regulator had been informed. 3 weeks after that, the chief financial officer of the bank spoke on the quarterly earnings call. An analyst from a brokerage in Connecticut asked about recent press regarding the lending platform. The CFO said the bank was very comfortable with the model's performance and was committed to continuous improvement and oversight. He used the phrase isolated incident. He used the phrase robust governance framework. And then he moved on to deposits. Wendell read the original statement on his phone, sitting in his car in the parking garage on Friday at 5:10. He had not driven home yet. He read it twice, then a third time slowly, looking for himself in it, for the file of the woman in Bellwood whose loan had been denied for a reason nobody could name, for the 17 files, for the spreadsheet on his laptop that he had stopped showing people. He recognized nothing. The statement was not lying exactly. Every sentence in it could be defended in a deposition. The bank did take fairness seriously, in the sense that there was a department with that word in its name. The bank was committed to responsible innovation, in the sense that there were slides with that phrase on them. The concerns were isolated, in the sense that nobody had been allowed to count them. Wendell sat in his car for a long time. The garage lights flickered the way they always did at that hour. Above him, on the 40th floor, the lights were still on. Somewhere up there, the statement had already become the truth. He put the phone down and started the engine. The auditor's name was Haverson and Reed. They were a mid-size accounting firm out of Charlotte. They had been auditing Wendell's bank for 19 years. They knew the building. They knew the coffee Each conference room had the broken thermostat. Every spring, 3 of their people would show up with laptop bags, and every spring they would issue a clean opinion. In the spring after project Lumen went live, they showed up again. The engagement letter, which Wendell would later read in a deposition binder, ran 42 pages. It listed every kind of risk the audit was supposed to cover: credit risk, market risk, operational risk, model risk. The phrase model risk appeared 11 times. Underneath the phrase, in smaller type, was a paragraph that mattered more than the letter itself. The paragraph said that the scope of the model risk review would be limited to documentation review, governance review, and management's representation of model performance. It said the auditors would not independently retrain, reweight, or inspect the underlying model. In plain English, they would read what the bank wrote about Lumen. They would not look inside Lumen. There was a reason for this. Lumen was not the bank's model. The bank had licensed it from a vendor in Palo Alto. The license agreement, which the vendor's lawyers had written, said that the model weights and the training data were proprietary trade secrets. It said that any inspection beyond an approved API would require a separate agreement, a separate fee, and the vendor's written consent. The bank had signed it without negotiating the clause. So had the 11 other banks that used Lumen. When the auditors asked for documentation, the bank handed them a binder. The binder had been prepared by the vendor. It contained performance summaries, fairness metrics, and a section called Explainability Overview. The Explainability Overview was 19 pages long. It described, in confident language, how Lumen produced a reason code for every decision. It did not describe how the reason codes were generated. It said the reason codes were derived from a proprietary attribution method. It said the method was based on, quote, recent advances in mechanistic interpretability research. The auditors checked the box. There was a second mechanism further out. The bank's federal regulator had issued guidance on model risk management years earlier. The guidance was called SR 11-7. It was the document everyone in model governance could quote from memory. It required banks to perform what it called effective challenge of their models. Effective challenge meant that someone, somewhere inside the bank, had to be capable of pushing back on the model's outputs with real technical understanding. The guidance did not say that someone had to be able to see inside the model. It had been written in 2011, before models like Lumen existed. The language had not been updated. The regulator's exam team came through in the fall. They spent 4 days. They interviewed the chief risk officer. They interviewed the head of model validation. They reviewed the same binder Haverson and Reed had reviewed. They asked good questions. The chief risk officer answered them carefully. He said the bank had a model validation team of 14 people. He said the team performed quarterly backtesting against held-out data. He said the bank had a model risk committee that met monthly. All of this was true. What he did not say, because the exam team did not ask, was that the model validation team had never seen the inside of Lumen either. They had seen the inputs. They had seen the outputs. They had measured the distance between the two and called it validation. They had no tools to look at the layers in between. The vendor did not give them any. The regulator did not require any. The auditors did not check for any. There was a third mechanism. The bank's board of directors had a technology committee. The technology committee had been briefed on Lumen twice. Both briefings had been delivered by the vendor's chief revenue officer. Both had ended with the board approving what was called a risk acceptance memorandum. The memorandum was 3 pages. It said the board had reviewed the model's benefits and limitations and had accepted the residual risk. 2 of the 7 board members had backgrounds in technology. Neither had a background in machine learning. The memorandum was signed in blue ink and filed in a drawer in the corporate secretary's office. 3 layers of oversight, 3 signatures, 3 clean opinions. Not one of them had looked at the thing they were approving. Not one of them could have. The mechanism that was supposed to catch what was happening inside Lumen had been carefully designed by accident to look only at what was outside it. The audit closed on schedule. The opinion was clean. Friday morning, the 3rd of October. The sky over the city is the soft gray of a dove's wing, the kind of sky that promises nothing and asks for nothing. Wendell wakes before his alarm, the way he always has, and lies in bed for a moment, listening to the radiator tick. He puts his feet on the floor. The carpet is worn thin in two oval shapes where his feet have landed every morning for 19 years. He notices this sometimes. He notices it today. In the kitchen, he fills the kettle. He still uses a kettle, the old kind that whistles, even though his daughter gave him an electric one for Christmas 2 years ago. The whistle is part of the morning. He spoons coffee into the French press, 4 scoops, and the smell rises up to meet him like an old friend. While the water heats, he stands at the window. The maple in the courtyard has started to turn. Just the tips of the leaves so far, the way a candle flame edges paper before the burn catches. A squirrel runs along the fence. A neighbor's cat watches it from a sill. He drinks his coffee at the small table by the window. He reads 3 pages of a paperback mystery he has been working on for a month. He cannot remember who killed the woman in the boathouse. He reads the same page twice and does not mind. At 7:40, he puts on his coat. Gray wool, 12 years old, the lining patched once at the elbow. The bus stop is 2 blocks east. He walks past the bakery and waves to Marisol through the glass. She holds up a paper bag and points at it. He shakes his head and smiles. Tomorrow, he mouths. She nods. Tomorrow. On the bus, he sits in his usual seat, 2nd row, left side. A young woman across the aisle is asleep against the window, earbuds in, mouth slightly open. Her phone has slid down her thigh and rests on the seat beside her. Wendell looks away. He has always thought sleeping people deserve their privacy. He gets off at Clark and Adams. The revolving door of the tower spins him into the lobby, and the air changes, the way it always does, from cold city to warm marble. The security guard, Devon, lifts a hand. Wendell lifts one back. The elevator hums up to the 3rd floor. His desk is the 3rd from the window. He sets down his thermos, hangs his coat, sits. The screen wakes when he touches the mouse. The Lumen dashboard loads in its usual blue. His queue is light today. 47 files. On a Friday, that is a gift. He works through the morning the way he has worked through 10,000 mornings. Click, read, click, approve, click, read, decline. The reason codes file themselves into their little columns. He hums sometimes without knowing he is humming. An old song his mother sang when she ironed. At 11:30, he stands up. His knees pop. He walks past the kitchenette where someone has brought in a box of pastries, and the apricot ones are already gone. He takes a plain croissant and wraps it in a napkin and goes to the stairwell. The roof access is technically not allowed. He has been going up there for 9 years anyway. The door sticks. He pushes it with his shoulder. The wind on the roof is cold and clean. Pigeons lift off the parapet in a soft gray flutter. He sits on the low concrete bench that someone long ago put there for reasons no one remembers. He eats the croissant slowly. Flakes fall on his coat. He does not brush them off. From up here, the city looks like a drawing of itself. The river is a dull silver. A train moves along the far bridge, slow as a thought. A helicopter crosses the sky to the north, going somewhere he will never know about. He closes his eyes for a moment. The sun is somewhere behind the cloud, faint and warm, and he can feel the shape of it on his face. He thinks about Priya. He thinks about the 17 files. He thinks he will speak to her again on Monday, properly, with coffee, the way you should talk about things that matter. He thinks he might call his daughter tonight. He has not called her in 2 weeks. He finishes the croissant. He folds the napkin into a small square and puts it in his pocket. He stands. The wind pushes his hair back from his forehead. He goes downstairs. He finishes his cue. He goes home. The envelope was thicker than a phone bill. Wendell turned it over twice on the kitchen counter before he opened it. The return address was a law firm in Wilmington he had never heard of. His name was spelled right. His employer's name was on the second line in smaller print under the words Notice of Pending Class Action. He sat down. He had not eaten yet. The coffee was still in the pot. The first page used the language lawyers use when they want to sound careful. A class had been certified. The class was large. The class included every applicant in 7 states who had been denied a personal loan, an auto loan, or a small line of credit between a Tuesday in March 2 years ago and a Friday 8 months back. The model had a name in the filing: Project Lumen. Reading it in court font made his stomach turn. He thought of the file from Section 6, the school teacher in Hammond. He thought of the 17 files Priya had pulled. He thought of the threshold that moved overnight, the one nobody could find a person to sign for. He had carried those things alone for a long time. Now they were in a federal docket with a case number, and his name was somewhere on the discovery list. The number on page 4 was the one that made him put the paper down. 6 million decisions. That was the size of the class before any narrowing. 6 million applications run through a model whose reason codes were generated by a second model, which had been trained on the outputs of the first. Nobody at the bank, the filing said, could reconstruct why any single denial had happened. The plaintiff's experts had tried. The bank's experts had tried. The reason codes were in the language of the complaint. Post hoc rationalizations, not causally linked to the underlying decision. Wendell knew what that meant. He had said it himself in plainer words to a manager who would not meet his eyes. The harm section ran 11 pages. A woman in Toledo had been denied a $5,000 loan to repair the transmission on the car she drove to dialysis. She had taken a payday loan instead. She had lost the car anyway. A man in Joliet had been denied a small business line for a barber shop he had run for 19 years. He closed in August. A couple in Beaumont had been denied a mortgage refinance and watched their rate reset. They were now in the second month of a foreclosure timeline. The filing listed 41 named plaintiffs. Behind them stood, by the lawyer's estimate, somewhere between 200 and 300,000 people who had been denied credit they would have received under the old underwriting rules. Of those, the filing said, a disproportionate share lived in zip codes the model had learned to treat as risk proxies, though no one had told it to. That was the part the regulators would care about. That was the part the news would lead with. But sitting at his kitchen table, Wendell thought about the smaller things. The man who who had stopped coming into the branch, the woman who had cried quietly in the lobby and then apologized for crying. The applications that had taken 4 seconds to decide instead of 4 days, and the way everyone above him had called that progress. He read the bank's quoted statement on page 9. It used the careful words from section 15. It said the institution was committed to fair and explainable lending and was cooperating fully. It did not say the model had been turned off. The model had not been turned off. The model was still running this morning while he held the envelope, deciding whether someone in Gary or Akron or Shreveport would get the loan they had applied for over breakfast. He thought about Priya. He thought about the memo from Risk, dated March, that had sat in someone's inbox for 8 months. He thought about the auditor who had signed the annual review without opening the model card. He thought about Chris Olah in that quiet interview, saying that you could find a feature inside a network and still not know with certainty what would happen if you pushed on it. The bank had pushed on it anyway, 6 million times. Wendell folded the letter back along its creases. He put it under the salt shaker, the way his father used to put bills he was not ready to open. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, a car door shut. Somewhere in the country, the model was deciding again. It would decide all day. Nobody at the bank could tell it to stop, because nobody at the bank could fully say what it was doing. The envelope sat on Wendell's kitchen table for most of Saturday morning before he opened it. He had made coffee. He had let the dog out. He had wiped down the counter twice. He kept walking past the table, looking at the return address, walking on. When he finally sat down, he read the letter 3 times. The first read, the words did not arrange themselves. The second read, he understood that he was a member of a class. The third read, he understood that the class was him. And roughly 14,000 other people whose loans had been denied or repriced by Project Lumen between January and October. The phone number at the bottom rang busy. He tried again at noon. He tried again at 1. At 1:40, he got hold music, a 4-bar loop of something that wanted to be jazz. He set the phone on speaker, put it on the table, and started a load of laundry. The hold music followed him down the hall. By Sunday afternoon, the local news had picked it up. Channel 6 led with a shot of the bank's downtown tower, then cut to a woman on her porch in a neighborhood Wendell knew. She had been denied a refinance in April. She held up her own letter. The anchor used the phrase algorithmic discrimination carefully, the way someone holds a hot pan. Monday morning, the bank held a press conference. Wendell watched it on his phone during his break. The chief risk officer stood at a podium and read from a single page. The bank, he said, was cooperating fully with regulators. The bank had paused the model pending review. The bank deeply regretted any harm caused to applicants. He did not take questions. He walked off the stage in under 4 minutes. By Monday afternoon, 2 class actions had been filed. By Tuesday, there were 5. A consumer protection group in Washington announced its own complaint. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau confirmed it had opened an inquiry. A senator from Ohio used the word scandalous on a cable news panel and then went to a different segment about something else. The stock dropped 11% at the open on Monday. By Wednesday, it had recovered 7. By the end of the month, it would close almost exactly where it had started. Wendell took a half day on Tuesday and drove to the attorney's office listed on the back of the letter. The waiting room had 12 chairs and 19 people in it. A young man in a windbreaker was crying quietly into his hands. A woman in scrubs was filling out a form on a clipboard, asking the man next to her how to spell adverse. A toddler ran in slow circles around a coffee table stacked with old magazines. The paralegal who took Wendell's intake was kind. She asked for the letter, his loan number, his denial date, the reason code on his denial notice. She typed for a long time. She told him the firm would be in touch within 60 days. She told him not to expect a quick resolution. She told him gently that even if the case settled, the average payout in matters like this was usually a few $100s per claimant. She did not need to say what they both knew. The house he had wanted in April was already sold. That night, Priya called him. She had been put on administrative leave Friday afternoon. after the lawsuit hit the wire. Her badge worked, but her email did not. She had spent the weekend in her apartment reading the complaint and crying off and on. She told Wendell she was thinking about going to a reporter. She told him she was also thinking about not going to a reporter. She told him she did not know which was the cowardly choice. He told her to sleep on it. He told her he would call her in the morning. By Wednesday, the news had moved on. A storm system was crossing the Gulf. A celebrity had said something on a podcast. The bank's press team issued a follow-up statement on Thursday afternoon, posted to their newsroom page at 4:50 p.m., which clarified that the Project Lumen review was being led by an independent third party, and that no determination of wrongdoing had been made or admitted. Nobody covered the follow-up. It was filed and indexed and surfaced only later by the plaintiff's attorneys. As Exhibit C, Wendell sat at his kitchen table on Thursday night with the original letter, the intake confirmation, and a yellow legal pad on which he had begun slowly to write down every loan he could remember declining or approving in the last 18 months. The hold music was still playing faintly from the phone on the counter. He had forgotten to hang up. Let's step outside the story for a moment. Wendell isn't real. The bank on the 40 floors isn't real. Project Lumen isn't a real product. But the failure pattern at the center of this episode is real. And it has happened in different shapes more than once. In November 2019, a software developer named David Heinemeier Hansen posted a thread about the Apple Card. He and his wife had nearly identical finances. They filed joint tax returns. They shared the same accounts. When they both applied for the new credit card issued by Goldman Sachs, he received a credit limit 20 times higher than hers. He asked why. Customer service could not tell him. The algorithm had decided, and the people on the phone had no way to look inside it. Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, replied to the thread. He said the same thing had happened to him and his wife, 10-1 in his favor, with no separated assets between them. The story went viral within days. The New York State Department of Financial Services opened an investigation. Goldman Sachs issued a statement saying credit decisions were based on individual creditworthiness, not gender. That was the official line. The harder question was whether anyone at Goldman could actually prove it. The model was a black box. The reason codes it produced were thin. Even the engineers who built it could not fully reconstruct, for any single applicant, the chain of inferences that led to a number. The state regulator's final report, released in March 2021, did not find that Goldman had broken fair lending law, but it described a system in which applicants who felt wronged had almost no meaningful path to an explanation. That was the quiet finding, not that the algorithm was provably biased, that nobody inside or outside the bank could prove it wasn't. This pattern is older than the Apple Card. In 2019, a study published in the journal Science examined an algorithm used by hospitals across the United States to identify patients who needed extra care. The algorithm made by Optum was applied to roughly 200 million people a year. The researchers, led by Syed Obermeyer at UC Berkeley, found that the system was systematically assigning lower risk scores to Black patients than to white patients with the same level of illness. The reason was subtle. The algorithm used past health care spending as a proxy for health needs. Because less money had historically been spent on Black patients, the model learned to predict that less money should be spent on them in the future. Nobody had told it to do this. It had inferred the rule from the data and then applied that rule quietly to millions of people for years. In 2016, ProPublica published its investigation of COMPAS, a risk assessment algorithm used in American courtrooms to help judges decide bail and sentencing. The investigation found that the system was nearly twice as likely to falsely flag Black defendants as future criminals than white defendants. The company that made COMPAS, Northpoint, disputed the findings. The debate over the math continued for years. What was not in dispute was that judges were using the scores, and that the scores were generated by a model whose internal reasoning was a trade secret. In 2020, the United Kingdom canceled exam results during the pandemic replaced them with grades generated by an algorithm. Nearly 40% of students received lower grades than their teachers had predicted. The pattern fell hardest on students from poorer schools. Protests filled the streets of London. Students held signs that read simply, "The algorithm stole my future." Within days, the government reversed the decision. The education secretary later said the system had been a, quote, fundamentally flawed approach. These are 4 different stories in 4 different sectors across 4 different years. Credit, healthcare, criminal justice, education. The common thread is not malice. It is opacity. In each case, a model made decisions that affected real lives at scale. And in each case, when the affected people asked why, the answer was some version of the algorithm decided. The people running the systems often could not say more than that. Not because they were hiding something. Because the tools to look inside the model had not caught up to the model itself. That gap between what these systems do and what we can see them doing is what the field of interpretability is trying to close. It is also the gap our fictional Wendell fell into. The bank in the story is invented. The shape of the failure is documented in regulatory filings, in peer-reviewed journals, in court records, and in the long, quiet archives of people who never got a real answer. The meeting was on a Tuesday, late February. A conference room on the 22nd floor of the bank's headquarters, 3 time zones away from where Wendell sat at his desk on floor 3. He did not know the meeting was happening. Almost nobody did. The agenda had 9 items. The Lumen review was item 6. It was scheduled for 15 minutes. The woman who had written the agenda, a vice president in operational risk, had originally given it 45. Her boss asked her to trim it. There were a lot of items that day. The quarterly board summary was due Friday. Item 6 was a request from the model risk team. They wanted to commission an external interpretability audit of Project Lumen. Not a fairness audit. Not a performance audit. Something deeper. They wanted a third party to look inside the model and ask what features it had actually learned. They had read the Anthropic paper. They had read the follow-up work on sparse autoencoders. They wanted to know if Lumen had built internal features that tracked something other than creditworthiness. The cost estimate was $412,000. The timeline was 6 months. The vendor they had in mind had done similar work for 2 European banks under the new EU rules. 11 people sat at the table. 2 more joined by video. The deck was 23 slides. They got through 9 of them. The objection came from the head of consumer lending. He was a calm man, well-liked, 6 years from retirement. He said the audit was premature. He said the model was performing inside every documented threshold. He said the regulators had not asked for it. He said the $400,000 was not the real cost. The real cost was the 6 months of slow deployment to the auto lending division, which was scheduled for May. The model risk lead pushed back. She said the threshold report from January had shown drift. She said the reason codes were clustering in ways the team could not yet explain. She said the word interpretability. And then she said the phrase reasonable assurance. The head of consumer lending said he understood. He said they all wanted reasonable assurance. He proposed a compromise. Defer the external audit. Stand up an internal working group instead. Have the working group report back in the 3rd quarter. If the working group found anything concerning, escalate then. The vote was informal. A show of hands. 7 in favor of the compromise. 3 against. 1 abstention. The chair, a managing director who had been checking his phone, said the motion carried. They moved to item 7, which was about the cafeteria vendor contract. The meeting ended 4 minutes early. The internal working group was formed in March. It had 4 members. 2 were pulled onto a different project in April. By June, the group had met twice. By August, the group had not met at all. In September, the working group's mandate was quietly folded into a broader governance initiative scheduled to launch the following year. That was the fork. A 15-minute slot on a Tuesday. A $400,000 line item that did not make the cut. One man, 6 years from retirement, who was not corrupt and not careless, who simply did not believe the audit was urgent. 7 hands raised in a warm room. A chair who was checking his phone. The Anthropic researchers had published their first paper on sparse autoencoders 2 months before that meeting. The technique they described would not have answered every question. It might not have answered most of them, but it would have surfaced something. It would have shown that the model had built internal features that responded to zip code clusters, to surname patterns, to address histories that correlated with neighborhoods the bank's old underwriters had once redlined and then forgot about. Chris Olah, in an interview that same winter, had said the goal of mechanistic interpretability was not certainty. He said it was the chance to be surprised by what the model had learned before the world was surprised by what the model had done. The bank was not surprised by what the model had done. It was informed by a letter in an envelope from a law firm in Atlanta. 18 months later, Wendell would never know about the Tuesday meeting. He would never know about the deck, or the show of hands, or the man 6 years from retirement. None of the borrowers would know. The judge in the eventual settlement would not ask. The fork was not dramatic. It was a calendar conflict, a cost estimate, and a tired room at 3 in the afternoon. That is how these things almost always look from the inside on the day they happen. Wendell kept a folder at home now. A plain manila folder, the kind he used to label at work with a black felt pen. Inside the folder, he kept printouts, articles, transcripts, quotes he'd copied down by hand because reading them on a screen didn't feel like enough. He sat with that folder on his kitchen table the night after the class action arrived. He read through it slowly, the way a man reads a letter from someone who tried to warn him. The first page was from May of 2023. Jeffrey Hinton had just left Google. He was 75 years old. He had spent his life building the very things he was now afraid of. In an interview with the New York Times, he said he had resigned so he could speak freely. He said, "I console myself with the normal excuse. If I hadn't done it, somebody else would have." He talked about systems that could write and reason in ways their makers did not fully understand. He said he worried about a future where we could not tell what was true. The article was dated May 1st. Project Lumen had gone live 2 months before that. Wendell turned the page. The next printout was from Joshua Bengio, another founding father of the field. In a blog post that same year, Bengio wrote that he had changed his mind. He had spent decades believing that powerful AI was far away. Now he believed it was close, and he was not sure anyone was ready. He wrote, "I recently signed an open letter asking to slow down the development of giant AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. He called for caution. He called for oversight. He used the word humility. Wendell read that word twice. The next page was a transcript from a Senate hearing. May of 2023. Sam Altman of OpenAI sitting at a long table, microphones in front of him. He told the senators, if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong. He asked for regulation. He said the companies themselves could not be trusted to police themselves alone. The senators nodded. They asked good questions. Then the hearing ended, and the work went on, and the systems kept shipping. Wendell kept reading. There was a printout from Timnit Gebru. The researcher Google had pushed out in 2020 over a paper she had co-written. The paper was called On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots. It warned, years before the boom, that large language models would reproduce bias at scale, that their inner workings would be hard to inspect, that the people harmed would be the people with the least power to push back. Gebru had said on a podcast in 2021, these systems are being deployed on people who never agreed to be part of the experiment. Wendell underlined that sentence with a pencil. He thought of the families on Lumen's rejection list. None of them had agreed to anything. There was a quote from Stuart Russell, the Berkeley professor. He had told an audience, "We cannot have a system whose internal operations we do not understand making decisions about people's lives." That was 2022. Lumen had been in design review then. Wendell remembered the meetings. Nobody had mentioned Stuart Russell. There was a printout from Joy Buolamwini. Her work on facial recognition had shown that systems trained on narrow data failed on people who did not look like the training set. She had testified before Congress. She had written, "The coded gaze is the reflection of the priorities, preferences, and prejudices of those who have the power to shape technology. Her warnings were a decade old. The banks had read them and built Lumen anyway. The last page in the folder was the quietest one. It was from Chris Olah, the Interpretability researcher Wendell had read about earlier. Olah had said in an interview that the field could now identify some features inside a model. He had been careful. He had not promised that they understood everything. He had said in plain words that there was a long way to go. The bank had cited his work in a marketing brochure. They had used his caution as a sales pitch. Wendell closed the folder. The warnings had not been hidden. They had not been buried in some obscure journal. They had been on the front page of newspapers. They had been spoken into microphones in marble rooms. Hinton in May, Bengio in May, Altman in May, Jebru years before, Buelamwini years before, Russell years before. The record was public. The record was clear. The decisions had been made anyway. Wendell turned off the kitchen light. He did not feel angry. He felt something heavier than that. He felt the weight of a record that no one had needed to discover. It had been there all along. Picture a different version of that same march in that same building, with the same beige carpet and the same coffee that nobody really likes. Wendell is still there. Priya is still there. The model called Lumen is still humming inside its server room, still scoring loans, still saving the bank money. The pressures are the same. The shareholders still want growth. The board still wants efficiency. The regulators are still understaffed and still polite on the phone. Nothing magical has changed about the world. The only thing that is different is what the bank did with one memo. In this version, when the risk team's report lands on the 17th floor, somebody reads it all the way through. Not the summary, the whole thing. And that somebody, let's say it's a vice president 2 years from retirement, somebody with less to lose than the others, walks the memo down the hall and says the words out loud. We need to slow down. In this version, the bank does not stop using Lumen. It does not throw out the model. It does not call a press conference. It does something quieter and harder. It puts a human back in the loop for every denial above a certain dollar amount. It hires 4 more underwriters, which costs less than the eventual lawsuit would have cost, though nobody in the room knows that yet. It commissions a real audit, not the paper kind, and it pays an outside team to run sparse autoencoders against the model's internal features, the way Anthropic's researchers had been publishing about. They find the same uncomfortable things that the lawsuit would later force into the open. A feature that activates on zip codes near certain churches. A feature that fires on names with particular vowel patterns. A circuit that has quietly learned to use a proxy for a thing the law says it cannot use. And because they find it in March, in a conference room, instead of in October, in a courtroom, they can do something about it. They retrain. They constrain. They write the constraints down where an auditor can check them. Priya, in this version, gets a small raise and a new title that nobody really understands. But she keeps her job and she keeps her mornings. Wendell, in this version, still works on floor 3. He still drinks the bad coffee. He still pulls files. But now the files he pulls are the ones the model flagged for human review. And his job is to read them like underwriters used to read them, slowly, with a pencil. He is busier than before. He is also, in a way he could not name, lighter. The bank in this version makes a little less money that year. The quarterly report is not as clean. 2 executives do not get the bonus they expected, and one of them is bitter about it for a long time. The stock dips, then steadies. The promotion that came in the old timeline does not come. The corner office stays empty for another quarter. Nobody writes a magazine article about the bank that slowed down, because slowing down is not a story anybody knows how to tell. There is no class action in the mail. There are no 3 days of hold music. There are 6 million decisions, the same 6 million, and most of them are still made by the model. But the ones that would have ruined lives get a second pair of eyes, and the patterns that would have hardened into precedent get caught while they are still soft. Somewhere in Ohio, a woman named Denise gets a mortgage she would not have gotten in the other version. She does not know she was almost denied. She will never know. That is the strange shape of this kind of grief. The people saved by caution never learn their own names on the list. They just go on living, harm that did not happen leaves no shadow. This world is not a paradise. Lumen still makes mistakes. The bank still cuts corners in other places. The same pressures that produced the catastrophe in the real timeline are still pressing every quarter on every desk. The only difference is that one memo in one March got read by one person who was willing to be unpopular for 18 months. That is the whole fork. That is all it would have taken. And the quiet, awful truth is that this version of the story was available. It was sitting right there, in the same building, with the same people, on the same Tuesday. Nobody chose it. Not because they couldn't. Because slowing down felt, at the time, like the more expensive thing to do. So now you know about Wendell. You know about the gray carpet on the 3rd floor and the coffee that was always a little too weak, and the quiet way his desk phone rang on the morning the letter came down. You know about Priya, who saw something in the numbers and said so out loud. You know about Project Lumen and the threshold that moved overnight, and the memo from Risk dated March that sat in a folder until November. You know that 6 million decisions went out into the world, and nobody at the bank could fully explain a single one of them. That's the part I'd like you to hold for a moment. Not the fear of it, just the shape of it. Because the strange thing about this story is how ordinary it was. There was no rogue machine, no glowing red eye, no villain in a tower. There was a model and a deadline and a quarterly report and a lot of good people who were busy. There was a tool that worked beautifully most of the time, and a small group of researchers far away who kept saying, gently, we cannot yet see all the way inside this thing. Chris Olah and his colleagues at Anthropic have spent years trying to look inside. They have found features. They have found circuits. In 2024, they pulled a concept called the Golden Gate Bridge out of a working model, like lifting a single thread from a sweater. And they watched the model think about that bridge when they pressed on the thread. It was a real achievement. It was also, by their own honest admission, the beginning of something, not the end. Bengio has said that we are building systems we do not fully understand and deploying them faster than we can study them. Hinton left his job at Google, so he could say similar things without a company logo behind him. They are not the loudest voices in the room. They are usually the quietest. That is part of why they're worth listening to. The point of Wendell's story is not that the model was evil. The model was not anything. The point is that a company chose to trust an answer it could not read. And when the answer turned out to be wrong in a particular and patterned way, the people who suffered for it were not the people who chose. That gap between the deciding and the consequence is the thing the researchers are trying to close. Interpretability is the unglamorous name for that work. It is microscopes and math and long, quiet afternoons staring at activation patterns. It will not make headlines often. It matters anyway. You don't need to do anything with this story. You don't need to remember the names of the papers, or the year of the breakthrough, or the threshold number on Wendell's screen. You're falling asleep. Your job tonight is to rest. But some part of you heard it, and the next time you hear a friendly voice on the radio say that a hospital, or a school, or a court, or a bank has begun using a new system to make things faster, some small, quiet part of you might think, just for a second, can anyone read what it's actually doing? Can anyone explain a single decision? Not in general. This one, mine. That little question asked by enough people in enough rooms is how the slower bank in our other ending came to exist. It is how Priya's memo in some other version of this story made it to the 40th floor in March instead of being filed away. It is how Wendell's Tuesday stayed quiet. The future of this technology is not yet written. The researchers are still working. The microscopes are getting better. People like Priya are still in the building somewhere, asking the question one more time. That is the part of the story I want you to carry into sleep. Not the catastrophe. The fact that someone is still trying to see. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day go. The lamp in the next room can stay on, or it can go off. The world will keep turning, and the people working on these questions will keep working. And you have done enough today simply by listening. Wendell, in our story, eventually slept too. Out on his small back porch, the night his daughter finally got through on the phone. The crickets were loud. The coffee had gone cold beside him. He closed his eyes. You can close yours now. Subscribe for a new AI story every night. One tap, and something fascinating is waiting for you tomorrow. Sweet dreams. A story to fall asleep to and wake up from. Sweet dreams.